Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Boule in this all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.
I'm having a slow holiday season as related to book sales. So I would appreciate it if everyone headed over to Amazon.com and picked up some of the books on the SJS Direct imprint, whether you pick up the fantasy books of the SJS Direct universe, like the ISIS series, the Esteem series, or the John Hayes series of the Spinsterella books, or my men's issues books like Stop Simpin' in the Workplace, Stop Simpin' in Cyberspace, Misadventures of Captain Save'em, or The Man or the Woman Crisis. All of that really helps me to be able to stay on the air and be able to continue producing great content like many of the videos you see on this channel. Now, one of my viewers wanted to know all about the West Coast Avengers, one of the big and more popular books of the 1980s. Now, in the 1980s, when I was growing up as a kid, the West Coast Avengers was one of the books every kid was talking about at the lunch table, and most of us were looking forward to this spin-off of Marvel's premier superhero team, the Avengers. Now, the West Coast Avengers was a book that was basically conceived by Jim Shooter to go out here and present how the Avengers were a major team, a team that would be so significant that they would have bases not only on the East Coast, where the X-Men and the Fantastic Four are, but would be so prominent that they would go out here and have a team in California fighting crime alongside other characters who were based in California, such as the Werewolf by Night, Firebird, and characters like Spider-Woman when she was out here actively fighting crime. And the West Coast Avengers would be Marvel's first real serious expansion into creating a spin-off book of one of its premier teams, and that's why it was such a big event in the 1980s. I mean, at that time, in the 1980s, before West Coast Avengers, basically all the teams were basically based in New York or the New York area. The Avengers and the Fantastic Four were both in New York City. The X-Men were basically in upstate New York, and the only team that was on the West Coast was the defunct Champions team, which was basically like a filler team of heroes. And when it came down to California heroes, there really wasn't much of a push here or there. Occasionally we'd get a book like Black Goliath, or Spider-Woman that would be based on the West Coast, but for the most part, many writers basically based all their teams in New York City as related to most of the action going on in the Marvel Universe. Now, this all changed in 1984 when Marvel launched its West Coast Avengers miniseries. Now, when they launched their West Coast Avengers miniseries, it was a huge hit, and the spin-off book basically, again, was the talk of the lunch table back in 1984, 1985, when I was, again, about 10 years old. All of us were talking about this book, and after picking up the limited series and seeing the West Coast Avengers come together as a team and, again, form as a team, again, a lot of us were counting down the days as related to picking up this team once again. Now, that's came again about 1985, 1986 or so. I think it was 1985 this series basically, no, it was 1986 that this series basically started, because Iron Man didn't get his red and silver suit until 1986. Now, the book may say 1985 in the corner box, but Iron Man didn't get his red and silver suit until about 86. So that's when this book came out, and again, when this book came out, it was a big deal. It was a big deal back then, and a lot of us kids were, again, real excited about picking up this book. And this book basically, again, was very different than the traditional Avengers book. I mean, the Avengers book that basically was at the time being written by Roger Stern. They were doing big stories like the Masters of Evil storyline and storylines like Submariner joining the Avengers, but the West Coast Avengers basically felt like it had more of a heart of a traditional Avengers book, but focused on completely different themes. Now, West Coast Avengers focused on more of a theme of redemption, and that was shown in the beginning with all of these different heroes like Henry Pym, who eventually became a member of the team. Now, the original team was Hawkeye, who was the leader of the West Coast Avengers, who was picked by the Vision to take over the team. And again, that fit within the theme of redemption because Hawkeye was, when he was on the original Avengers team, was the team's hothead. He always challenged authority like Captain America and always talked about how he could do a better job. Well, the Vision basically went out here when he created the West Coast Avengers, gave Hawkeye that opportunity to go out here and be that leader that he said he was, and that was one theme of redemption as related to Hawkeye, who again started out as a bad guy but now would be the leader of this team. And then we have Mockingbird, a failed SHIELD agent who basically was a rich girl who basically did do some time in the Savage Land, again learning from Kazar, but nothing ever really worked out for her as a superhero. And her life, she was starting to turn her life around when she married Hawkeye after the Hawkeye miniseries, which was written very well by Mark Grunwald. And that was another character who was going through a redemption arc. The third character was Tigra, a character who basically failed as an Avenger from about issues 211 to about 218 or 220 or so, and basically failed as an Avenger, but eventually was replaced by the She-Hulk. And then Tigra basically again fizzled out as an Avenger during her first run, but the West Coast Avengers would be a place where she could basically go out here and try to get her next chance as a hero, because Greer Nelson originally was a hero known as the Cat, a so-called perfect woman who was a feminist who basically wound up becoming Tigra after she basically ran into some Hydra agents, and eventually after she became Tigra, she didn't really do as well as a hero, and she actually did a little bit worse than she did as the Cat, because at least as the Cat, she was at least, again, getting some wins, but the thing is that she had some real serious issues as related to her self-confidence, as related to things, and the West Coast Avengers would be a place where she could basically go out here and try to find her direction as a hero. Now, after that, we've got Iron Man, who was one of the founding Avengers. Again, one of the founding Avengers, but at the time, Tony Stark was basically dealing with alcohol, and as he was dealing with alcohol, he was, his replacement, Jim Rose, decided to join the West Coast Avengers, because he had moved to California and he wanted to go out here and maintain the legacy of Iron Man, and also wanted some support from a team, and as related to the Iron Man armor, because Tony Stark's company, Stark International, had been bought by Obadiah Stane, and as it had been bought by Obadiah Stane, he needed help in repairing his armor and, again, building his armor. And that's where Tony Stark, recovering from alcoholism, just started working with the Avengers, similar to the way Henry Pym is presented here. Tony Stark was in a similar fashion, working on a brand new suit of armor so that the Avengers could still have Iron Man. But eventually, in the pages of Iron Man 200, Tony Stark eventually came back in the legendary Silver Centurion armor, and as he came back in the legendary Silver Centurion armor, basically became another member of the West Coast Avengers. Now, the final member of the West Coast Avengers was Wonder Man, and Wonder Man basically became a part of the team. He became a part of the team because he was moved to LA to become a stuntman and was looking to expand his career to build his self-confidence. Now, Wonder Man basically had self-confidence issues because he feared dying, and because he feared dying, basically Wonder Man had self-confidence issues as related to being a hero that he dealt with all throughout the original Avengers series. And the West Coast Avengers would be a place where he would try to find redemption as related to issues that led to him becoming a villain when he first came out, and also helped to rebuild his self confidence as a hero. Now, all of these elements were the things that made West Coast Avengers a very compelling comic, because it did a great job of maintaining the history of these characters, did a great job of maintaining the history of these characters, and did a great job of further developing and growing these characters. That was one of the things that really drew me in, was the fact that we were getting to see these characters grow and grow back out of the hardships that they dealt with in the 80s. I mean, each of these characters all had their different hardships. I mean, in the 70s they were big time heroes, but in the 80s they were basically dealing with coming out of a dark period. You had Hawkeye again learning how the ropes of leadership after years of challenging Captain America. You had Mockingbird learning how to again work as a team and again redeem herself from her years of failures as related to being a SHIELD agent and being in the Savage Land. You had Tony Stark again coming back from alcoholism. You had Tigra trying to regain her confidence after failing as a hero 2 times. You had Wonder Man trying to come back from death. And then you had Tony Stark again coming out of alcoholism. All these characters were having to deal with redemption arcs. And again, redemption was the major theme of this series, and something that really was something every reader could identify with, because these were not perfect heroes. No, these were flawed heroes who had made mistakes, and that was the thing that drew us in with West Coast Avengers. And they weren't a perfect team. Again, they only had 5 members, and they're looking for a 6th one. That's what the first story arc was about. And the whole first story arc is very compelling because they're still dealing with different aspects of stuff that went on in previous books, like Iron Man Annual 7, where they had to deal with the new Goliath, Eric Jostin. I mean, so many different storylines that were being built up on, and the writer does an amazing job of developing all these characters, in a fantastic series, a fantastic series that just gets better with every issue. It just gets better with every issue because we see these characters basically grow and develop. We see these characters grow and develop over the course of this book as related to their legacy. I mean, everything in this book is really solid because Steve Englehart basically he wrote the Avengers back in the 70s, and he picked up on a lot of great plot threads and had a good sense of these characters. He had a really good, solid sense of these characters and could build on, again, what was in the past and what was in, and focused on, again, moving these characters forward. That was what really was great about this book. Now, a lot of people have a beef with Al Milgrom as related to the stiffness of the art, but it never really was a problem for me because he really had a good handle of the characters. I mean, he had a very good handle of the characters, and he had a really good handle of Marvel history. That was another thing that made this book really good, was everybody had a good handle on Marvel's history. I mean, West Coast Avengers had the best handle on continuity and the best handle on overall storytelling. And again, the writing here from Steve Englehart is rock solid as related to building this team. I mean, he does a really fantastic job of building this team, and that's what makes this book one of the more underrated comics, at Marvel during the 1980s. Now, I know a lot of people liked other spin-off books like Web of Spider-Man and other books that came out at that time. I mean, Web of Spider-Man was one of the big books of the 1980s, but West Coast Avengers was one of those gems that, again, once you read it, you basically enjoyed it, and you basically, again, in many cases, the book felt more like the original Avengers and had more of the heart and soul of the original Avengers. That was one of the things that made this book must read every month. I mean, it made it a must read for readers as related to things because it was one of those books that basically had a good handle on Marvel's continuity, had a good handle on Marvel's history, was very tight and well done, I mean, it was one of those books that basically, when you picked it up, you again felt like you were coming into the Marvel Universe. Every story was nonstop action. Every story was absolute fun. You weren't disappointed with West Coast Avengers. You wouldn't be disappointed. Again, every story was again absolutely fun and again very well done. This is a book I can highly recommend because as a kid I enjoyed it, and as an adult I still enjoy it. I still enjoy this book because the writing is that good. Now again, they dealt with more offbeat West Coast style villains, but the storytelling was solid. Even though you had guys like Al Milgrom, who again was pretty stiff on the art. The art basically, again, it's just basic, fake, basic, simple art. It's not anything like McFarlane or Jim Lee, but it gets the job done. And the storytelling is pretty tight. Storytelling is pretty tight all around with West Coast Avengers. And again, it's a book that a lot of people overlook. They overlook it and they miss everything that was so cool here. And again, for us kids in junior high school in the 1980s, this book was again one of the must-read books for us. I mean, this was a book that again was really cool. And again, as the book went on, they got other members. You got eventually Henry Pym wound up joining the Avengers, and Moon Knight wound up joining the team. And a lot of the characters started to regain their confidence and regain their edge. I mean, characters like Wonder Man started to build up their confidence. Characters like Henry Pym started to realize it was the man inside that made him a hero. Tony Stark went back to being the hero that he once was. Clint began to get his confidence as a leader. The only one that really fell off was what's her name, Mockingbird, as related to a tragic story that took place with the Phantom Rider. But even then, she still overcame after that great tragedy. But the West Coast Avengers was a completely different team than the Avengers. The Avengers took on big threats, but the West Coast Avengers took on more internal threats from inside of themselves. And that's what made their book, again, that much more compelling to us comic fans back then. It made us that more compelling to us back then because the heroes were, again, dealing with their own issues. Now, this was the first comic I actually bought in 1987. With my own money back then. This book right here, Avengers 29, I bought that back in 1987, one summer day in August. And again, this was the book that got me hooked on buying West Coast Avengers. I mean, I had known about the book, but the whole thing is I just didn't have the money back then. But this is the book that got me in. And again, West Coast Avengers was one of those books that, again, the more you read it, the more you loved it. And the more you love it because, again, it just had its own unique feel, but again, sometimes even felt more like the Avengers than the regular Avengers book at the time, which had Black Knight and Submariner and Hercules, and again, that book and Captain Marvel. But this book felt just like the old school Avengers book in some cases, because they took on a lot of different old school villains like the Zodiac and many of the other Avengers villains. Again, this book was one that just was so exciting, because it was like it felt again more Avengers than the standard Avengers book. And again, it's one of those books that's just, again, like I'll say it again, it's just a boatload of fun. And sadly, what happened with West Coast Avengers is eventually the book wound up changing to Avengers West Coast. And after it changed to Avengers West Coast in 1989, and John Byrne came on the book. After John Byrne came on the book basically wound up, again, a book struggling as related to its direction. It struggled as related to its direction after John Byrne wound up leaving the book. After John Byrne wound up leaving the book, it wound up struggling for a while, and then eventually the book wound up getting canceled and made into Force Works. And the less said about Force Works and the extreme 90s, the better less said, because the extreme 90s wasn't good to the West Coast Avengers characters. And thankfully, what happened here with the West Coast Avengers, even though the book did get canceled in 1994, was many of the ideas for West Coast Avengers basically were carried on. And as related to things, the whole theme of redemption was basically carried on in about 1997 or so with the Thunderbolts comic book. Now, Thunderbolts, like West Coast Avengers, was about a group of villains who basically decided to pose as heroes, and as they looked to pose as heroes, villains like Goliath and Moonstone and Screaming Mimi and Beetle decided to go out here and become Mach 4 and Songbird and Atlas and many other and different characters, and eventually Thunderbolts again followed with the same themes of redemption, that West Coast Avengers did, and basically Thunderbolts became one of the biggest hits of the 90s, and one of the most popular books of the 90s as related to the late 90s, and that all of its success basically is due to the West Coast Avengers creating those themes of redemption and showing how what makes a hero is the person inside, and that person inside having the character to go out here and deal with their flaws, deal with their issues, and overcome those issues by going out here and realizing that what makes them flawed humans also is what makes them great heroes. That's what makes West Coast Avengers a great comic, and again, really the whole core of the book is about human beings overcoming their flaws to go out here and become heroes. That's why I love this book, and I can highly recommend this book to all the young readers out there. And I'm glad that the viewer asked me to talk about this comic, because this was a big comic in my day. And again, it was must-read for us kids in the 80s, and it's definitely going to be a read for you if you go out here and pick it up. Now, my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is available on Lulu.com, and you can pick up a copy for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter. And again, you can pick up the books of the SJS Direct 2025 catalog on Amazon.com right now, and on there you can pick up books like Esteem Season of the Witch Girl, John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side, and Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer, not to mention other great books like, again, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons, or Isis, My Sister, My Frenemy. And again, you can pick up John Haynes at Death's Door, available on Lulu.com. And if you want to see me make more videos talking about comics, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And I use that money to go out here and pay comic artists for covers on my books and comic artists for different art. And I also use it to go out here and support great indie comic creators with their Kickstarters and other crowdfunding projects. And again, I'm having a slow sales month for books for this holiday season, so it'd be greatly appreciated if you could head over to Amazon.com and pick up any of the books I mentioned, and that really helps me out and helps me to stay on the air. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available on Lulu, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at Lulu.com today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Season of the Witch Girl. The aspiring angel takes on a wicked teenage witch in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Pick up your copy of Esteem Season of the Witch Girl in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.